Why is Lent so sad? A friend asked me that the other day, and he said, why does it have to be so sad? And in reality, we could look at it from different perspectives and saying, Lent should lead us to joy. So what role does sadness have in all of this? Does it even have a role? So we're going to look at 3 different types of sadness. The first type is the sadness that comes, just a simple human sadness that comes when I see somebody suffer, when somebody close to me dies, when something hurts me. So it's a way of me reacting to reality. And it's a way of expressing what that reality or that situation is provoking in me. The second type of sadness is a sadness that doesn't come from God. And we can tell because it starts to take our peace away. And it's a type of sadness that comes when it comes with all the shadows. I start to lose peace. I can be really negative about different situations. Essentially, I'm receiving, perceiving, seeing something, not through God's eyes, but through lies. Because behind those sad sentiments usually come thoughts that aren't necessarily from God, that aren't in fact from God, because it probably is a way of looking at reality that doesn't totally correspond to the truth. And so it leads me downhill. But then there's a third type of sadness that, believe it or not, it's a grace. And St. Ignatius shows us that as well in his exercises, that there's a sadness that when I'm seeing Christ suffering for my sin, or when I realize what my sin caused him, it produces sadness. And it's a sadness not like when I go to adoration and they put on a really emotional song and then I start crying. So I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a huge grace. That simply was the first type of sadness that we talked about. That's a human sadness provoked by things that should provoke sadness. We're talking about this third type of sadness is something that God sends you as a gift. And it's a way of really living a closer relationship with God. And it's a way of letting his sacrifice for us, his love for us, move me. And it moves me to conversion, which then leads me to live with greater joy. And that's why you can have people who, on Good Friday, in the midst of all the suffering that Christ is living, and it's very sad and they can even cry for what's going on. You watch the movie The Passion, it's impossible to not shed at least a few tears. I've never shed less than many tears when I've seen it. But at the same time, the person who receives this grace can live it with joy. Because from that sadness, it moves me to a conversion that leads me to live in the fullness of joy. Because I have the joy of knowing that I've been redeemed and loved by God. So these are our 3 types of sadness. One is simply part of life. Because our life is broken and because things aren't perfect. And that's why we're living this life for the next one. The second one, when it comes, is saying, Jesus, in your name, I want to renounce this sadness that doesn't come from you, and especially renounce the lies that come behind it. All those negative thoughts, and to say, I'm not going to keep playing with those. I'm going to give these to you. You take it away. You take it. Because that's what you did on the cross. You took all this. You are there so you can take all of this from me. And then the third one is to ask him for the grace in this Lent, to say, give me the grace at some point to receive that grace, because that type of sadness isn't something that I can produce on my own. That type of sadness is something that comes on as a grace that God gives us. And it's a grace that leads us to an ever greater and deeper joy.